continuing our study through Matthew. At least that's where the church calendar, the lectionary has taken us. And way back, I'm going to begin by kind of summarizing of Matthew, and because I think it helps as we are led up to where we are today, because we're in another parable, and the parable, which is a story, and I'm going to talk about parables again in a second, because it's been a while since I talked about that, but these are stories, and the stories that we have engaged all begin something like this: the kingdom of heaven is like this. This is what it means, and that's a question we all have. What is it? What does the church mean? What does it mean to be a follower of Jesus? All of those questions are important questions that, for those of you who have been in the church a long time, you work through those questions. For those who may be visiting for the first time, for those maybe not engaged so much with the church, you wonder, well, what is this all about? What does this mean? These stories, and they're helpful to us. But one of the things he does, so parables, way back when I first went, I think the first parable we did was the throwing of the seed, and we began right away to see that when Jesus tells these stories, he actually told us early in Matthew, is the reason that Jesus tells stories is so that we would learn something about him. The stories Jesus tells, these parables, are meant to reveal Jesus, and they're meant to reveal the mysterious things that people have wondered about for the longest things we didn't know about the heart of God. These stories are meant to reveal the heart of God. What we have been finding as we've been going through them is what they reveal about the heart of God most of the time causes us to scratch our heads. Because God isn't like us, and what his kingdom is like and what it means to be a follower of Jesus is so other, and it is so different than what we are that, going back to the first parable, and we tend to make these stories all about us, but Jesus told us they're all about him. And so we tell the story. So way back in the first story I told, it was about this farmer who threw seeds, and we read in the story, well, the kingdom of heaven is like a farmer who gets on his John Deere and he rides up and just throws seed on 19. What kind of fool is that? The foolish farmer. Do you think seed's going to grow when you just throw it on 19? And then we went through all the various things, but they always threw us for a loop. Like, okay, God at times can seem pretty foolish. And now we're kind of toward the back end, and Jesus actually tells a story that I actually think was extremely calculated. It's actually meant to offend us all. And it certainly offended told it to, and I think it'll offend us. It offended me this week. It still offends me, even as I'm about to talk about it. And so, but this is what the kingdom of heaven is like. This is what it means to be a follower of Jesus. So before I read it, I'm going to go just briefly through. So in Matthew 17, there's this event in Jesus' life where he appears on the mountain and glory comes. It's called the Transfiguration. And Peter, James, and John are with him on the mountain when actually heaven comes down to Jesus. And this kind of begins the story of Peter, because you know what Peter does. So Moses and Elijah also joined Jesus in this event in Matthew 17. And Peter immediately sees Moses, Elijah, and Jesus in all of his glory. It is a glorious moment for Peter. And Peter says, let's build something. Let's build booze, because this moment is going to last forever. Then when Peter wants to build something, a voice comes from heaven there and says to everyone who can hear, this is my beloved Son, Jesus. Listen to him. And then I'm going to draw us right to where we are today. So immediately they come down from the mountain. And Jesus said some of these we've been through. Jesus says to Peter, remember Jesus says to Peter, you know what? The voice has said to listen to me, and you know what? I got something to share with you. I'm going to come and suffer and die. And what does Peter say? Not listening to that voice. Not a good voice to listen to. I'm here to build something. I'm here to build a kingdom. That's not the kind of kingdom I'm looking for. So Peter says, nope, not listening to that. I'm going to have to pull Jesus aside and rebuke him. And Jesus says, get thee behind me, Satan. This is my beloved Son. Listen to his voice. You know, from there on, Jesus is talking about the kingdom, and so he says, my kingdom is going to be one that comes through suffering and death, but even then, no one gets it, and so all throughout, even and we haven't done all of these things, but you know, even taking last week, it was on forgiveness. Peter's always wanting to know what to do. What does the kingdom look like? How many times in this kingdom do I have to forgive people? Jesus says, you're asking the wrong question. I'm going to give you a number so that you can't count anymore. If we were to go through the rest, I mean, the disciples all the way, Jesus actually talks about divorce because someone comes and asks him, they're basically asking, Jesus, in this kingdom, when can we get rid of our wives? How many times do I have to forgive? How many times do I have to put up with my spouse? And then even Mama Bear comes in the scene, and we didn't do that one. Mama Bear, James and John's mama, comes and says, you know what the kingdom of heaven is like? It's like my two sons, one sitting at your right and one sitting at your left. That's what we think the kingdom is like. It's like limited forgiveness. It's like working through relationships matter. It's like being in power for my sons. What are my sons going to get? And then in chapter 19, right before this, a rich young ruler comes to Jesus. A man comes to Jesus, and you know what? He's actually recorded everything he's ever done, and he's done it all. And he tells Jesus he's done it. Look, I've obeyed all of the commands. What must I do to be part of this kingdom? And Jesus says, well, you sell everything you have and follow me. That's what the kingdom looks like. We pick up the story there, and before we read in chapter 20, so following that young man who came to Jesus, who basically had recorded and kept track of everything that he had done and asked if it was enough, Peter is feeling pretty good because that guy got sent away, and here we go with Peter again. So before we read the parable, here we go with Peter again, and here's what Peter said. Then Peter said, see, Jesus, we've left everything and followed you. What do we get? What do we get? That guy, he didn't leave everything, but Jesus, we're here. And we have left everything for you. What's in it for us? What do we get? What's the prize? And then Jesus tells this parable, which I'm going to read from Matthew 20. For the kingdom of heaven is like a master of a house who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the laborers for a denarius a day, he sent them into his vineyard. And going out at about the third hour, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace, and to them he said, you go into the vineyard too, and whatever is right, I will give you. So they went out, and going out again about the 6th hour and the 9th hour, he did the same. So the master kept going out. About the 11th hour, he went out and found others standing, and he said to them, why do you stand here idle all day? And they said to us, because no one's hired us. said, well, you can go to the vineyard too. And when evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, call all of the workers and laborers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last up to the first. And when those who were hired at the 11th hour came, each of them received a denarius. Now, when those hired first came, they thought, wow, they're getting what we agreed to. I can't wait till he gets to us because we're going to get more. But each of them also received a denarius. And upon receiving it, they grumbled at the master of the house, saying, these last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat. But he replied to them, friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what belongs to you and go. To give this last worker as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or do you begrudge my generosity? So the last will be first, and the first will be last. Now, doesn't that just tick you off? Even as we engage the story, and go back to the first verse of the slide, we identify with this. Yeah, this actually has a lot to do even with the parable last week of the one who forgave the servant. But we can identify with this because you know who we tend to identify with. So with those who are upset. I mean, we get that, right? I mean, now don't go all spiritual on me here because we know the end of the parable. We get it, right? Someone comes and works an hour and gets paid for the same amount of money as someone who works 12 hours. That rubs us the wrong way. And this is a parable, and I don't think Jesus is teaching economic lessons here. He actually is teaching an economic lesson, the economy of the kingdom. But he is hitting at our sensibilities. What is it about this? Why do we so resonate with that? I mean, it's not fair, right? It's just not fair. Yeah, I can relate. I mean, after all, I think especially for us, and I would say this for anyone who has been part of church much of their life. I always call us the God talkers. We're the God talkers. We get this, and we actually even play the part in it. And you know what? If you haven't been part of the church very long, or this is even your first Sunday here, you actually can resonate. It's ironic. You actually would resonate with the parable Jesus tells, because I think you would agree. All of those people who have been there forever, they are just the whiniest people. It's like whoever's been in the church the longest, we're typically the whiniest. Think about it. Because we always have our sense of fairness. We always have our sense of justice. And that's what's rubbing us here. I do. I've done. I actually look back in all of those moments and all of the years back when I first chose to go into ministry. I go into ministry. I can relate. Any young people who go to seminary, you know why you go into seminary? This would be true for me. Because I was in church my whole life, and I'm going to fix it. I want to fix the mess I grew up with. So I'm Mr. Eager Beaver. And I do it, and you know what? Guess what? 4 or 5 years into it, it all falls apart. You know what goes through my mind when it's all falling apart? I'm Mr. Gospel Man. I'm Mr. Grace Man. I gave up a career to do this because I am such a jolly good fellow. And this is what I get? That's not fair. It's not how it operates. We do, and it's almost even the kingdom of heaven is actually, Jesus is speaking, because at times the kingdom of heaven actually looks like this. It looks like a group of God talkers who get together, and anyone new who comes in, we begin to cast a wishful. I mean, how many of us, even in church settings, when we actually begin to see someone new come to the church, and then maybe they get up and sing, or different, and you know, the first thing we want is, I've been here a long time. Why do they get to do that? They haven't proven themselves yet. How do we know if those late arrivers have even really repented? I've got 12 hours worth of repentance, and they have 1. I get it. I get the struggle of this story. Love and our sense of justice. They seem to work against each other. It's like justice comes along, and there's the parameters for which we do relationship. There's the parameters by which we work. There are all of the parameters. And then love comes and just wipes it all away. I think one of the reasons this parable offends, one of the reasons I think it's meant to offend, is that Jesus has come along and say, this is what the kingdom of heaven is like. It's like the generous Father whose heart is full of love and is full of mercy. I got a quote from Brennan Manning that I'm going to read now. He says this at the end of his book called The Ragamuffin Gospel. He says, perhaps, and I won't go into what he's talking about, that explains our reluctance to risk. We know only too well that the gospel of grace is an irresistible call to love the same way. No wonder so many of us elect to rules rather than live in union with love. Rules are just easier. It's easier when you just tell me how many times I have to forgive. It's easy for you just to tell me that sin and when I'm not condoning that sin. It's easy for you to tell me that it just is a bunch of rules. Well, if you come and you start at the first hour of the day and work 12 hours a day, then this is what you should get paid. And if you only work 1 hour, you should only get paid this way. It's easier to live amongst the rules to guide us than in love, which tells us, like, what? How does that work? I mean, I can see us working with Jesus. Why'd you tell a story like that? You actually are going to, you know what, you're going to go to the marketplace tomorrow, and you're going to have guys ready to work there, and they're going to hold off. Because they're going to wait till the last hour of the day, because they know if they only have to work 1 hour, Jesus, they're going to get paid as the same as the people who work 12 hours. Don't you know that the economy of the kingdom, you just can't say stuff like this, Jesus? Because people will take advantage of your love and generosity. You know what the crazy thing is? Is that everyone in this room took advantage of the love and generosity of Jesus this week. Love and justice, we struggle with it, and then Jesus comes along and he tells this parable that sends us reeling. This is what the kingdom of heaven looks like. We want to know what the kingdom of heaven looks like. You know what it means to be a follower of Jesus? You know what it means? The story of this parable is Jesus is actually talking about the reality that the Jews, the people of God, had been given this story and the reality and relationship with God with all through the Old Testament. And now Gentiles, sinners are coming in. And as Lori said, the promise is the same. It's not different. It's not different if you've known this your whole life. It's not different if you just heard about this morning. The promise is the same. Do we struggle with that reality? You know, it struck me this week, at least for me, and I don't know if it's true for anyone and everyone that is here this morning, but I certainly resonated with those who didn't think it was fair. Do you know, I actually think that's the point that Jesus to. Could you imagine being in that line? And being the ones who only worked 1 hour? I mean, I don't know what that part of the line would look like, but as the master went down the line, and the guys who worked only 1 hour realized that they had got the same generous wage as those who worked all day. But I imagine there would have been some glad-hearted backslapping. Can you believe this? Can you believe this? What a generous master. What a generous God. I think that's the point. You see, I think the point is, even going back to me thinking that I'm some gift of the gospel to the Church of Christ, we just do it. I remember a few years ago, a while back, I remember listening in on some individuals talk that they were part of a local Christian school that I was aware of, and they were talking. It was the end of the year, and they kind of had just had their end of the year award ceremony. And I think, like any teacher, no matter where you're a teacher, I think one of the thrills of teaching is that you get to look back over a year. You're going to miss the students that are gone, that are graduating. You're going to look at where a kid was at the beginning of the year and look at where they are at the end of the year, and you're going to walk through all of that. And I think there there's going to be some sense of encouragement, which I think there should be. There should be some sense of joy at what has happened. But it reminded me as I was listening in to these individuals talk, because here's, again, and I'm not saying this is me thinking I'm God's gift to the gospel here. Just, can you believe people actually wouldn't send their kids to our school? Look at what's happened with the kids. What great teachers we are. What great people we are. I mean, it was the gist of the conversation. It all sounded well and good. But as I began to think, and as the Lord began to work on me, and has worked on me, hopefully, and is continuing to work on me with His gospel, you know, the reality is, whether you teach in a Christian school, whether you teach in a public school, whether you watch those kids grow and learn as you teach and use your God-given gifts, if there is change at the end of the year, there is change in spite of you, not because of you. Because of you, and if it is because of you, they've probably grown through the ways you failed them, and they've watched you go through that. I think we read this parable, and I think we read this story, and we actually miss the point, because the reality, you know what the kingdom of heaven is like, and this is what heaven will really be like. Someday we are going to stand before the throne in heaven with Jesus. And you know what group of people we are going to? We are going to realize that we did absolutely nothing. That someone else actually worked the vineyard in the scorching heat of the sun and took all of the work that He did and He gave it to us. You know what heaven is going to be like? It's going to be like a full group of people from Nature Coast Church, backslapping and high-fiving each other as we stand before the King saying, "Can you believe this?" That's what the kingdom of heaven is like. Because this story is not about you. And it's not about me. It's about, you know, even at the end, when He's talking to the, we've heard this too. This story is so backwards. Because we also can relate to the master. And here's how we would say it. We own a company. People don't like what we do with the money of the company. They come and tell us, and what would an owner say? I have the right to do anything with the money that I have. It's what the master actually says. You know what the key difference between us and the master is? You know what his right is? It's the right to give it all away. He has the right to be generous and to give it all away. God is a generous God. You may look at this story and say, this master is utter. Do you know what the kingdom of God is like? It looks a lot like foolishness, where the last will be first and the first will be last. This story that Jesus gives is actually very freeing, because you know why everyone's whining and complaining? Because they're comparing themselves to each other. You can even struggle if you showed up at the last hour wondering, I'll never get the approval of those who have come and worked a long time. I will never get the approval of others. This actually flattens everyone because everybody's identity, everybody's place in the kingdom of heaven is because of the Father's love. You know what the kingdom of heaven is like? A father who just is wildly crazy about his children so that they can be free to find their value in his love, not in what someone else made or didn't made, not in what someone else is doing or not is doing, not in the fact that I just arrived lately and I'll actually never be like the one who was here all of their lives and I'm only here now because I got here lately and I've done this and I've done this, and the last I tell, these people were so busy working, they never did anything wrong. The heart of the Father in this story frees everybody. It frees the Johnny-come-lately. It frees the religious God talker who they've always been their whole life so that they don't have to be either. If you're a Johnny-come-lately, you're not bound by what you've done or haven't done. If you are a God talker that's known this whole life, you're not bound by always performing and always keeping up and always judging. Because the kingdom of heaven's foundation is the love of God, the generosity of God, and the forgiveness of God. The kingdom of heaven's foundation is not about the quality of the people who are in it. It's about the heart of the one who is the king. Last week we learned that the kingdom of heaven is like one who forgives 70 times 7. This week we learned that the kingdom of heaven is a one who will never begrudge the Father of his generosity. You know, the Church of Jesus Christ is a mini colony of what a Huron laws and all of those things, what the kingdom of heaven should look like. You know what Nature Coast Church should look? I mean, not just Nature Coast Church, but any church. Our church is defined, going even back to last week. Oh, I can't wait to get to that church because the most forgiving churches I've ever met. It's the defining mark. It's a place of forgiveness that you can come. Actually, I think sometimes it's the opposite. We actually try to and market ourselves as so tidy and clean that no one who ever really needed to think that they needed to be forgiven would ever come. I mean, that's a really serious question, not just for Nature Coast, but for any church that is a mini colony of the kingdom of heaven. Is our church known in the community? Our church is known in this watching world. There's a place of forgiveness. There's a place of generosity. Churches have become known as the places that you come to be judged. So I'm going to close with this. What I can't imagine is that those who only got paid for an hour, if you were to describe their disposition, it would actually be. I've asked this question throughout the parables. Is the Church of Jesus Christ in North America defined by our joy or by our judgment? This is what the kingdom of heaven is like. It's like a master who just wants people to come, and he goes and he gets them. I didn't even go into that. God goes and gets us. He's always going and getting. His love is always and going and getting us. Some in the first hour, some in the third hour, some in the sixth hour, some in the last hour. It is always going to get us, and the promise is always the same. And whether think you've gotten in the last hour, and by the way, the reality is we have all gotten in the last hour. And may we backslap, and may we with joy sing, because we can't. That there was a God who in the scorching sun hung on a cross, and he finished the work so that you and I could get his wages. You see, so much of what we work for, the wages are full of death. But Jesus comes this morning, and he offers the gift of his life that gives us life.